Hi, Norm Allen with you on another version of Meet Your Neighbor, where the stories are all about you. And they certainly are, all about great people all around the lake. And today the story is a very, very interesting story with our friend Ted Ferriter. He and his wife Pat live here on the lake and been here for a few years. We'll find out about that and a lot more, but let's just kind of introduce you to Ted. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great to be here, Norm, and thank you for putting this together.
You know, when you look, and we've talked about careers, and you've had many careers, it seems, and a lot of wonderful experiences. Where did it all start? Where were you born and raised?
It turns out my dad was a naval officer, and he and my mom both are from Washington, D.C. I was born in Washington, D.C.
So you're a native of the area?
Native Washingtonian, exactly.
But you didn't live here all of your life because of being military kid.
Exactly. Mostly up and down the East Coast, but lived in the D.C. area a number of times. Most naval officers avoid D.C. if at all possible. However, because my dad and mom both were from D.C., whenever an opportunity came to serve in D.C., my dad would raise his hand.
So he could be back home again.
Exactly. So, because we had cousins, aunts and uncles, all that kind of stuff right here in D.C., in the D.C. area.
So you went to high school in D.C.?
Actually, no. My mom and dad were real concerned about me having some continuity in my high school years, so I actually went to a boarding school.
Oh. In Virginia?
No, in New England.
In New England?
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that had to be an interesting experience.
Oh, it was, and sort of towards the end of it, I was really ready to come back to Virginia, so I applied to the University of Virginia, and that's where I went to college.
So were you didn't join the Navy until later on, though, right?
Much later, actually. I had some other experiences in between UVA and the Navy.
What was your major in college?
English literature.
So your plan was to be a teacher at that time?
Not really. I had done some teaching. I actually taught in a small school in Mexico, taught English in a small school in Mexico during my kind of like a semester abroad type scenario. But I wasn't, focused on being a teacher. I think a lot of people at UVA majored in English and then went on to law school or some other career. So I was in college during the years 66 to 70. There was a lot of turmoil during that time frame. Some were drafted and sent to Vietnam during that time frame. I had a student deferment while I was at the university. And then at the end of that, I had, at the end of my college experience, I had no intention of going in the military. The short story is I went in the Peace Corps. I served for 2 years. While I was in the Peace Corps, I was drafted. And so I had to do something when I came back from the Peace Corps, and that was when I joined the Navy.
What was go back to the day that you made the decision that the light came on, that the Peace Corps was something that you would be interested in being involved in?
Yeah, it was in my senior year at Virginia, and it turns out I had extremely good friends who had been in the Peace Corps. And he was a graduate student in the law school, as a matter of fact. But he had graduated from Virginia, gone in the Peace Corps, and then come back to law school. And I probably saw myself following a path similar to that. So we met in California, filled out some forms. Very quickly after that, got on a plane and flew to New Delhi.
And what year was that?
That was in 1970, the summer of 1970. In fact, I think I graduated in June, and this was in July, because I was in New Delhi for the 4th of July celebration at the embassy. I remember that very specifically.
Was that exciting for you?
It was different. I didn't expect, I thought we would be completely immersed in the culture of India, and all of a sudden I find myself at a hot dog and hamburger picnic in New Delhi at the embassy compound, and so that was a little different, a little surprising.
And India was in a particular state at that time too, because the Bangladesh War was getting ready to crank up, and
Yep.
I mean it was in quite a bit of stress.
There was a lot of conflict between India and Pakistan at the time. It was in the papers every day that I was there, after I arrived, and I was given a lot of questions about why the United States was supporting Pakistan instead of India. India is the world's largest democracy. Why aren't you supporting us? That sort of thing.
What was the biggest surprise that you got when you got in country for the first time and you come outside and there you smell and see what New Delhi's about?
Exactly, the smell. I will never forget the smell. And you have some experience in that, and it was overpowering. And it took several days for that to kind of dissipate, for your senses to adjust to it.
Was that the surprise?
That was the initial surprise. The next surprise was, our time in New Delhi we were only there less than a week for sure. And then we got on a train because we were going to South India, and we got on a train.
Which we're talking about how many miles?
About 1,000 miles. About 1,000 miles from New Delhi to Madras, which was our next stop.
The southeastern coastline.
Exactly. And maybe 1,000 to 1,200 miles. And we got on a train. It wasn't a fast train, and it wasn't a luxurious train. And it took us 48 hours to go from New Delhi to Madras.
Non-stop.
Oh no, lots of stops, lots of stops. I mean, literally, probably easily every 50 miles, maybe every 20 miles. And every time we stopped, people would, attack the train with things to sell us, things to eat, things to drink, most of which we'd look at and go, oh, no thank you, I think I'll pass on that. But we were taught already, how to watch out for ourselves in terms of food and drink. So if it was something boiled or cooked, you were okay. And if you could peel it, you could eat it. Anything else, don't touch it.
Or else.
Or else, exactly.
Yes, Montezuma is not only a Mexican problem, it's all over the world in some of those places. So here we have, during the daytime, you're on a train sweating your way down for 48 hours, and I say sweating because we're talking 100 plus temperatures.
And this was in July, so it was incredibly hot. And going through, we could see villages in the distance. The one thing that did kind of surprise and jump out immediately were the colors. The colors that you saw, the ladies in the incredibly beautiful and colorful saris, these chartreuse greens and brilliant pinks and that sort of thing. And then flowers, lots of bougainvillea, lots of jasmine. And at every train station, the guys that weren't selling you food and drink, the women were trying to sell you flowers and maybe bits of cloth or a sari or something like that. So very, very, very colorful. I can remember sitting in the bus that took us from Madras to Bangalore, another round numbers 10, 12-hour journey, and I sat up near the driver, and I was stunned at how alert he was to maneuver the bus around hazards, whether they be holes or people or animals or you name it. He was an expert. I mean, he knew what he was doing, and he was picking up cues that we weren't picking up. We're used to seeing a sign that says, slow down, pothole ahead, curvy road, whatever. He has no cues whatsoever, so he's just doing it visually, and he's got to really pay attention. So,
did you feel a sense of protection because you're with other Americans at that time?
Yes, I don't think there was never any sense of like, hey, we're in danger or anything like that here.
Felt pretty secure.
Very secure, yes.
And you had traveled around the world in other places too.
I had done a little bit of that. Some of the folks had not. We chatted a lot on the train and the bus, and got to know each other, but also, kind of tried to comfort each other and say, hey, it's not going to be that bad, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Once you got to Bangalore, and you've gone through some training, and the training was several weeks to prepare you for what your assignment was going to be. Suddenly you're finished your training, and now you're off to assignment. Where did you go?
Well, the training actually went through three parts. Number one, we were living in a hotel. We went through a lot of psychological testing because each of us was going to be in a village or a small town by ourselves, and they wanted to make sure that whoever went out there didn't embarrass themselves or the United States government or the Peace Corps. And so there was a whole battery of psychological testing that we went through. That happened in a hotel complex. We were doing mostly language training, again, some admin type stuff, a little bit about teaching in India, some of the unique things about it, and but that lasted maybe around numbers a month, something like that. Then the next month was focused more on life in South India and the culture that we were going to be living in, and also the English part, how to teach English. I'll tell you what my assignment was in just a minute. But during that time frame, that second month of training, we lived with an Indian family. And so to the most extent possible, we spoke only Tamil with that family, and the local language, and also we tried to learn about the culture, how to eat, how to just basic things. Like, for instance, my bed in the when I lived with the local family, these were very nice people and upper middle class in India, but my bed was a straw mat, and so I'd take that mat and unroll it at night, sleep on it on their concrete floor, and then roll it up in the morning and stick it in the corner. That was, so I was actually learning what this whole program about living in South India was going to be like. So that was the second third, and then the last third of the training was a month in a town called Tiruchirappalli, which was a major city, probably 200,000-300,000 people. So it was a big city, and that focused 100% on our training, on our mission. What were we going to be doing, and how were we going to be doing it?
And your mission was?
How to teach, teaching future primary school teachers how to teach English and how to teach health and nutrition. Teaching teachers how to teach English and how to teach health and nutrition. And by the way, I was in a government, what they called basic training school. That was the name of it, Government Basic Training School, or GBTS. Almost all the guys, in fact, all the guys were in these government schools. Most of the women were in private teacher training college. 2 years. As the 3-month training period, we graduated in September and went out to our villages. And you asked earlier about, well, what was that like? And that was a shock, to say the least. I'm the headmaster of the school that I was going to be teaching in came to Tiruchirappalli, which is where we had our graduation ceremony, and then he and I got on a train. He didn't speak a lot of English, so all of our communication was either in Tamil or sign language or whatever. He and I got on a train, another train. Trains in India were something else, and so we got on the train about like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was another all-night train, and that got us close to where we were going. And then we got in a little pony-driven cart, a jutka it was called, and so it was him, me, my little suitcase that I had, and the in the little horse-drawn cart, and he took me to where I was going to sleep and where I was going to stay, my quote room. and dropped me off. And I will never forget walking in that little room, and there was one bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling, and nothing else in the room. Nothing, not even the mat. If I was going to sleep, I was going to be sleeping on whatever I had in my suitcase. And anyway, he dropped me off and said, "I'll see you in a couple of days. See you on Monday for class." And I kind of went like, okay, here we go. This is it. I was in my little town. I was in Ronipet. I was probably 6 months into my 2-year tour, and I got a letter from the draft board in Rutland, Vermont, which is where I happened to register for the draft in 1968, I believe. And anyway, it said, congratulations.
Greetings from the president.
Greetings from the presidents. You have been drafted. And so I was not opposed to serving. Many of my colleagues in the Peace Corps were, okay, so it was a little different. They might have had a little different perspective than I did on what they were doing in India and that sort of thing. But so with the help of the Peace Corps, I wrote them a letter. I wrote the draft board a letter, and it basically said, "Hey, I'm happy to serve. I'm in the middle of this program here. I've already started it. How about you let me finish it? And then when I come back to the States, when I'm done with my Peace Corps service, I'll be happy to serve." And so I wrote that letter, and they bought it. And of course, maybe in the back of my mind, there was a little thought about, there was a lot of talk about the draft. Is the draft going to continue, or are we going to end the draft? All that kind of stuff. And so
this is in 1972.
This had been in I probably got that letter in 71, is my guess. Okay, end of 70, early 71, and the bottom line is they didn't forget about me. They remembered me. They had the letter. And so when I left India in 1972, I pretty much knew that I was gonna serve.
So you come back home after that great experience. Now you're equipped for something else. Now another new phase of your life starts.
Exactly.
You're a single man, a college graduate, 2 years in India experience,
yep.
And you come home ready to tackle the next adventure.
Exactly.
And how did that adventure start?
Well, I was a college graduate, so I could qualify for officer programs. And to make a long story short, I found myself in the Naval Officer Recruiting Office in Washington, D.C.
Back home again.
Back home again, and I had another piece of paper from the U.S. Army at that time, and it said, "Hey, by the way, we want you to be in Richmond, Virginia, tomorrow, the next day, for your induction physical, not pre-induction physical. I'd already been through that. This was for my induction physical." And so I'm sitting there with the officer recruiter, and he says, "Hey, Ted, your package looks good. You've got a pretty good chance that you'll be accepted into an officer program. Here's some forms. Fill these out. Come back in 60 days, and we'll submit those, and we'll see how your application goes." And I said, "Hey, listen, thanks very much. I appreciate all that, but I don't think you understand. I have to join the Navy today, not tomorrow, because tomorrow I'm going to be in Richmond, and I'm going to be
in the Army."
And so I either join the Navy today, or something else is going to happen tomorrow. So bottom line is, he says, "Well, hey, that's great. So sorry to hear that. But there's nothing I can do, because you have a process. There's a process to go through for officer selection and that sort of thing." And so there's nothing I can do. I can't help you. However, the Navy enlisted recruiter is about 10 blocks away in southeast Washington. Here's the address. If you want to go over there and talk to them, they may be able to help you. I don't know. Again, long story short, within a few hours, I was standing with my recruiter, raising my hand, and was sworn into the Navy.
As an enlisted man?
As an enlisted man, yep.
So you had to go through boot camp and everything?
Actually, the program that I enlisted in was what's called a 180-day delayed entry program. And so I was able to use that 180 days for my, even though I was sworn in, and so that stopped the clock for the Army, and it started the clock for whatever it's called, inactive reserve. But what that did was that gave me 180 days before boot camp to complete the officer candidate application.
Right.
And that's exactly what I did. So I went down to Pensacola.
Now, were you married at that time?
No.
Still a single guy?
Single guy, yep. I used that 180 days to get my application in order. I was selected to go to Aviation Officer Candidate School in Pensacola, Florida. I actually met my wife. She was a nurse in Corpus Christi, Texas, where I was stationed, and we were heading down the road to get engaged, and she got a phone call one night, and they said, pack your bags, you're going. You're going to be gone for a while. You're going to be gone for several months. And she said, well, where am I going? They said, well, we can't tell you. So
she was military also?
She was a Navy nurse that happened to be stationed in Corpus,
right?
And which is where we met. And then it turns out she went to Guam, and she was part of the group that took care of the refugees that were leaving South Vietnam in huge numbers. And so she was stationed in Guam on basically a 12-hour port and starboard type of thing, working in the wards, taking care of the refugees that were coming in huge numbers out of South Vietnam at the time.
That's almost parallel to a Peace Corps experience in itself, isn't it?
It is. In fact, comparing notes with Pat, my wife, on what it was like taking care of these folks, they spoke no English. They had babies that were desperately ill, maybe suffering from starvation, malnutrition, just like I saw in India, and these were very, not primitive people, that's not the right word, but very unsophisticated people. And so yes, her experience at the Naval Hospital in Guam was very similar to what I had seen in India a couple of years previously.
And you guys are the parents of two sons?
We are, and amazingly, one of them joined the Marine Corps and is in the Marines today. He's a major in the Marine Corps stationed out in California. The other son really surprised us when he said that he was going to apply to West Point, and did that, got accepted, graduated, and served in the Army for a number of years.
So your career went on and on. You had a full career in the Navy.
I did. I retired in 2004.
As a captain?
As a captain. I raised my hand that day that I described at the enlisted recruiters in southeast Washington in November of '72, and I retired in October of 2004. So I was about a month shy of 32 years.
Right at 32 years.
Yeah.
So from the radical 60s to the idealistic, and I can say this because I was there too, to the naive idealistic, because I went to India to change the world, and the world changed me is what happened. and then to a discipline that's dedicated to service to the country. How have your ideals evolved in that?
Well, that's a great question, Norm. Thank you so much for asking. Honestly, India, as you know from your experience, is a that was a life-changing experience. When I went to India, I was definitely naive. I had very little worldview. I had actually only traveled outside the country that one time to Mexico. And so now I'm in a completely foreign country on the other side of the earth, completely cut off from my family and friends, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the United States of America. I learned a lot about our government and how it works and why it's so incredibly powerful and such an incredibly powerful idea. And I saw another side in India, and it gave me a totally different perspective. And so when I came back from India, I had a different idea about my place in America and how my service could make a difference, and why I felt that service in the military was so important. So my service in India in the Peace Corps was transformational in terms of changing my perspective. It was such fun getting together with them and sharing experiences and that sort of thing. And I had unbelievably good friends in South India, and this couple was one of several couples that really had a huge influence on me. Bama is the gal's name, and she literally taught me how to eat with my hands. And she taught me about various Indian foods and cooking them and all that kind of stuff. And to this day, I'm hooked on Indian food. I had a very interesting conversation with Sekar, who is the husband of this family, about what we were just talking about, how important it is for parents to kind of provide the right direction and to help to shape kids and grandkids. That's our job, and we love that job, but it's something that is extremely important.
Well, it's great that you recognize, because so many parents and grandparents are missing out on those things. They don't recognize that they're still valuable. They think, well, their kids are off living their life, and we have ours, and we'll see them on the holidays and send them a $20 bill on birthday. No, a $150 bill these days on their birthdays, and that's kind of it. But you stay involved because, again, that heart of service. Well, I thank you so much for having this time. I mean, we've been friends for a few months now, and I feel like I know you better after our visit today, and I know that you do too.
Great.
I hope that you've enjoyed meeting your neighbor, Ted Ferriter, and I know that you'll, when you see him around.
Norm, I need to editorialize for just a second.
Okay.
Thank you so much for letting me be part of this. We here at Lake of the Woods are so lucky to have people like you that get involved in our lake and make our lake a better place every day. And this show and the things that are going on with TV18 are absolutely a reflection of how we can take something good like Lake of the Woods and make it better. And so thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that. We're all just one beggar telling another beggar where the bread is.
Exactly.
Well, that's about it on this version of Meet the Neighbor, and I hope you've enjoyed our visit today and some of the pictures we see of life in India and naval life. But, it's another neighbor. It's somebody you never know where the story's going to come from. They could be your next door neighbor, could be you. If you do have a story, I hope you'll contact us. Give us a call, and the number will be on the screen. Or email me, and I'll be glad to get up with you, and we'll tell your story or someone that you know's story. In the meantime, this is Norm Allen with you, wishing you a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining us on Meet Your Neighbor, where the story is all about you.